Thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction, and thanks to everyone for joining us here this afternoon. That's kind of the first of 4 T's to get us started here today. The second T is a little bit of a technical note. I'm doing this WebEx a little bit differently than usual, so I'm doing a screen share as opposed to having my presentation hosted in WebEx. So you might actually see a little box, a little floating WebEx box in your screen view. So you can just use your cursor to move that out of the way if it happens to be there in your view. The third of these is just to mention that we are doing live tweeting of today's conference, and you see the hashtag here on our first slide. It's hashtag ArmsReachBranding. And so if you want to follow the live tweeting, or if you want to tweet out something nice on your own, please use that hashtag. And the last of these introductory T's is just to make note of a tradition that we have here at the Futures Company, which is to end every year with a little bit of a look about the big issue ahead in the marketplace to come that we ought to be focusing on as we try and manage our brands for the future. Of course, we do a lot of thought leadership work like this. If you're not particularly familiar with us, you can find this on our website under our Free Thinking tab, as well as our blog, as well as our curated content of Trend and Tonic, as well as a lot of other stuff in news and events that include various speeches that we've done or other presentations at other conferences. And I would also remind you that as part of our Monitor sponsorship, we do a live event every month. And the next live will be on January the 16th about a download on men, hosted by our co-heads of the U.S. Monitor business, Ryan McConnell and Sarah Catlett. So please join if you'd like to as we talk about things you need to know about men. But today we're going to talk about something different. Today we are going to talk about the big issue ahead as we look at the future of marketing, particularly as we roll into the next couple of years. And it's all about what big data means for marketing, in particular what big data means for engaging consumers in the marketplace. Now, we've all heard of big data. There's nothing new about it. But its relevance to marketing is something that has now come to a pivot point. And it was really brought home by the presidential election that we just went through here last month. And in the aftermath of that, we heard all about how President Obama used big data to out-campaign Mitt Romney. We heard about his billion-dollar database operation that was used to fundraise, to get out the vote, to seed social networks, and we heard about how he used this effort to overcome some disadvantages that no incumbent president has ever been able to overcome before, high unemployment and low job ratings. And so with that kind of success, all of a sudden, big data is on the screen for marketers, and we're all sort of lining up to do a big data effort like this on our own. But it turns out that it's not quite that simple. And in fact, we got a little sense of some of the trade-offs involved in this, again, in the post-election period when there was a lot of discussion about why Mitt Romney's polls, for example, were giving him misinformation about what was happening in some of the swing states in the last week or so leading up to the election. And one pundit speculated that by the end of this particular election, big data had contacted people so much that everybody was just worn out with this election. And the only people answering the phone in the last few days leading up to the election were the most committed, most partisan voters who would give you some sort of a misdirection about where the election was headed. And it's kind of this paradox that the best way to run a campaign, as it turns out, is not necessarily the best way to engage voters in the political process, such that the use of big data is actually sowing some of the seeds of its own destruction. So as we think about the relevance of big data for marketing, we have to pay attention to these trade-offs associated with big data and really understand how it is that we can ratchet up our marketing saturation without at the same time disengaging consumers from our brands? What is it that we need to do in a big data world that is on our radar? And that indeed is our focus today. What do we need to do to engage consumers in this big data future? Because after all, this question of engagement is really crucial. How do we engage consumers who are increasingly walling off their lives from our marketing? Now, traditionally, we try to engage consumers in one of two ways. We've either done it before the sale in our marketing and make our marketing more engaging, or we've done it after the sale with our products and the way in which people consume and use our products and make that experience more engaging. Unfortunately, marketing is losing its power to engage consumers. Now, note that I'm not saying brands are losing their power to engage consumers. I'm specifically talking about what we do to sell our brands to consumers. And in a big data world, we have to face up to the fact that marketing irreducibly puts consumers at arm's length. A tipping point that we're now having to face up to as big data becomes a more important part of the way in which we build our brands. And for the future, this means a few things. It means that marketing has to occupy a different place in the way in which we manage our brands, and it means that consumption or the product experience or the usage experience or the immersion that consumers have with our brands has to assume more prominence, has to come into the foreground, particularly by focusing on a few key areas that we'll talk about here at the end: play, kinship, and cultivation. All of this is simply to say that the future of marketing is changing. Instead of marketing being something that actively operates with consumer decision-making, it is going to have to move to a more secondary role subordinate to the product experience. And not only is marketing changing, but consumers are changing too. Increasingly, they are closed off to marketing, and not simply because they themselves are becoming alienated from what we do, but because the structure of marketing itself in a big data world is focused on a different priority than consumer engagement. It still has value, but it does something different for our brands than engaging consumers. And consumers are, as a result, more focused on lifestyles and consumption and usage. They're not running away from our brands. They're just shifting position about how they want to be engaged with our brands. It is not the same old consumer doing the same old things in new ways. It's a completely new consumer doing new things to whom we, unfortunately, continue to market to in the same old way, just with all these new fancy tools we have these days. In other words, if you want to engage consumers in the future, don't look to your marketing. Look instead to the ways in which people are consuming your products. And this is a story that I want to talk about here for the next half an hour or so in three parts: retreat, realignment, and renewal. Or the things that are losing impact, what we need to do about it, and then the way in which we can increase our impact with consumers going forward. Note that this shift in marketing is not the end of brands. It is simply a change in the way in which brands need to prioritize and focus on consumers. And let's start with what's going away, these things that are retreating in the marketplace. And this is a shift in locus of engagement in the way in which people interact with our brands. As I said already, historically, there are two big buckets of this: things before the sale and things after the sale, or to put it in different terms, marketing engagement and consumption engagement. Two different ways in which consumers could be involved with our brands. And the shift that we're seeing in the marketplace, and one that big data is going to completely push in a different direction, is this shift away from marketing engagement to consumption engagement, such that brands engage consumers more in consumption and less in marketing. Indeed, if you will, we are going from sort of point-of-sale engagement to post-sale engagement. We're going from selling to savoring as the way in which we engage consumers with our brands. And I'm sort of using these terms marketing and consumption very generic ways. You know, marketing, I'm sort of talking about the things we do to sell our products, our communications, our promotions, our sales contacts. With consumption, very broad area, but in general, it's the way people use our product, the way they're immersed in it, the experience that they have with our products once they have them in their hands. And this sort of shift is something that I want to talk about today in this kind of a graphical framework. I want to look at the things that are going down, the retreat, and then I want to look at the things that are going up, the renewal. Two sort of broad domains of consumer engagement with brands, which in the future will mean less marketing and more consumption. And this is a graphical framework that we can use to kind of trace the contours of this shift in the marketplace. So let's start by looking at what's going on with marketing engagement. And the reality of life for consumers when it comes to the kind of information that we push at them is very simple. They are living in a world of more and more. And this is having the impact of creating a response of less and less. More is life as people live it these days. And you see it everywhere you look. This graph actually tracks the number of minutes the average consumer spends every day with all media, old and new. And as you can see, it now exceeds 11 hours a day. And indeed, this is only going to grow. It's grown in the past. The Global Information Industry Center at the University of California at San Diego has tracked the amount of information that we actually consume on a daily basis and has seen a tripling of that since 1980. It is overwhelming. Now, some of this is the doing of consumers themselves. They throw themselves into this. So this is not an indictment of marketing, but it is certainly a reflection of the reality within which our marketing actually operates these days. And even more of this is on the way. You know, this big data world is expected to grow exponentially. IDC estimates that just around the corner by the year 2015, the number of bits of information in the big data universe will exceed all the stars in the known universe. It's that huge. Now, admittedly, consumers are not consuming all of these bits of information, but they are certainly going to be consuming more and more of it, especially in the ways in which they use media. Google recently did a study about the way in which we use the various screens in our lives, and they published it all over the web. You can find it in particular at SlideShare. And one of the key findings of this research is that more and more of the ways in which we interact with brands and understand what our options are to buy occurs across multiple devices. In fact, 77% of us no longer watch TV without another device in hand. This multitasking, this increase in the amount of information that we try to consume continues to escalate it, and consumers like it, and we like it as well. We encourage it, we promote it, we want more multi-screen usage because it solves an efficiency issue for us related to reach and awareness. And that increasingly is what marketing is focused on, efficiency. But in driving efficiency, it is creating disengagement with consumers at the very same time. Because after all, more is not necessarily the better way in which consumers can interact with our brands. Multitasking, as I say here, is just trouble for the asking. We have known forever that there are cognitive limits to the amount of information that people can actually consume and process. This title here is taken from a 1956 paper written by George Miller, who at the time was a psychologist at Princeton. This is one of the most cited papers in the history of psychological research. And what he found in his review of the literature at that time was that the amount of information, the number of options that people could hold in working memory at any one time was kind of 7 things, plus or minus 2. A magical number that has been consistently reconfirmed and rediscovered in the nearly half century since then. Additionally, we have begun to learn that multitasking also impacts the way in which we process information, and it does so by the so-called 50% rule. When we multitask, we miss 50% of the visual cues that we are exposed to, and we make 50% more errors in the way in which we make decisions and process information, and it takes us 50% longer to do things when we're multitasking. This is clearly not the way in which we want consumers to be processing our ads or processing our marketing communications, but by pushing more on consumers, we are in effect institutionalizing this kind of 50% error rate in the way in which consumers consume our media. And there is now a growing body of evidence that multitasking also affects our mood and our affect and our attention. There's more stress, more depression, more social anxiety, obviously more truncated social interaction, and indeed more overstimulation when we multitask. Some research even shows that we can get addicted to multitasking. Our brain sort of gives us a little squirt of dopamine every time we switch screens, so that switching screens becomes an end in and of itself, irrespective of any information that we might be getting from that experience. And the paradox of this, then, is that more winds up being less. Because to cope, even when we like the information that we get, we have to give it very short shrift when we take it in. Research again has shown that when people are multitasking or using or consuming more information, they have more superficial message intake. They scan, they chunk, there's less depth and more switching. They use media hierarchies, so maybe where we've got our message is not getting full attention. There's more in and out viewing. They focus on a narrower range of topics, and the result is less involvement in the way in which they're consuming things. They put us on autopilot. They don't spend as much time trying to decipher the messages we're communicating to them, and oftentimes they're jumping away before they're finishing our messages. So it just doesn't work. Consumers are consuming more, but understanding no more than ever before, and indeed perhaps even understanding less. And the end result of this is not that consumers are fleeing marketing, but that consumers are simply less able to process and take in marketing with the same kind of efficiency that they did in the past. The result of that, as we heard from McKinsey about 5 years ago, is that our marketing efficiency is in significant decline. In a highly publicized 2005 calculation, McKinsey estimated that by 2010, just a couple of years ago, TV advertising would be a third less effective than it was 20 years before that. Why? Because of all the things I just talked about. People switching off, multitasking, less message impact because of saturation, all of these things that are created in this big data world. This is the ultimate impact. It's one of consumers engaging with marketing in a big data world in a way that diminishes their ability to process and respond to our information. It's not that we don't have any effect in our marketing. Clearly we do. It's just that it costs us ever more to get the same effect that we used to have. And it is thus changing the economics of our brands. And changing the economics of our brand at the cost of less brand engagement. Because marketing overload can only be dealt with by disconnection from consumers. And this sort of takes me to the first bottom line of today's presentation. And that is that 21st century marketing is an inherently disengaging experience for consumers. And if you don't think it is today, give it 5 years of big data coming onto the scene, and then see what you think about consumers being engaged with all of this information and all of this marketing that we are pushing at them. Indeed, the advance of technology has dramatically worsened saturation and clutter. We've gone from 9.8 gigabytes a day to 33.8 gigabytes a day. And the fight against it, the multi-screening, multitasking that we're pushing on consumers, has only added to the deluge. And this kind of inundation incapacitates consumers, causing them to erect walls, all to the detriment of involvement and engagement. But I'm not arguing for a return to paradise. I'm just arguing for a recognition that we're not in Kansas anymore, to kind of mix my metaphors there. There's no going back. It's just what it is. So all I'm saying is, this is the new reality. The marketing that we used to use to engage consumers with our brands is less and less an effective tool for creating that in the marketplace. Marketing instead is focused on something else. It's focused on efficiency. And efficiency is not necessarily the way to drive engagement in the marketplace. How much to spend where is what we spend all of our time thinking about in marketing these days, and lots of money is being spent where consumers are least involved and least able to engage with our brands, even if they wanted to. And this, of course, is only going to get worse. Indeed, in the time since the election, in just the last 2 weeks, in fact, there have been big stories in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal about big data and micro-targeting, and what we can learn about consumers with these huge databases that we're compiling, and then how we are using these databases to drive our offers to consumers. And what we're doing, in effect, is being more efficient in the way in which we're putting offers in front of consumers, because the principle behind micro-targeting is that people are more responsive, or I should say most responsive, to the things they like already. And so micro-targeting is all about giving consumers more of that. But by delivering that kind of efficiency of offers, we are taking out a lot of what consumers used to have to get involved and do. Consumers used to have to get involved and figure out where things were. Now they don't have to do it. So consumers can be brand engaged without being marketing engaged. I can love my brand without really having to think much about getting my brand. Or at least we hope that consumers remain brand engaged, because to a large extent we've lost control over that with our marketing. Marketing today is institutionalizing disengagement as a standard part of the consumer experience of media and retail. And we see this in consumer behavior, in the way in which people act in the marketplace. Not only is more or less, but we're actually seeing less as well. The time spent shopping, for example, has been declining dramatically, even as the amount of money people have been spending has been going up. What you see here in this chart is the average hours per day spent purchasing goods and services in the pink line, which runs along the right-hand axis, as tracked by the American Time Use Survey since 2003. And during good times and bad for the economy, which you see plotted here as real personal consumption expenditures, the average amount per month in total. What you see in good times and bad is that time spent shopping is down. And this is true across all formats. The median time per visit spent on e-commerce sites is down over the last few years as well, even though average revenue is up. So spending is more, but consumers are engaged less. And again, what we're doing here is winning the battle of efficiency at the cost of engagement, and thus potentially undermining our brand foundations over the long term, as long as we are depending upon marketing engagement, as opposed to consumption engagement, as the focal point for consumer engagement with our brands. So just to reprise this bottom line here, 21st century marketing is an inherently disengaging experience for brands. Less time shopping means less opportunity to engage, and with less emphasis on time spent shopping and more emphasis on time saved, we are institutionalizing this kind of disengagement. Efficiency is trumping engagement. Indeed, the critic Megan McArdle recently made a very similar point in whatever you want to call it these days, the Daily Beast or Newsweek. They've merged and they've all gone online. But her point was simply that in the future of shopping, brick-and-mortar retailers will be able to compete with online retailers only by offering luxury-style service. because online retailers are going to win the efficiency battle in the long run. There's no winning that battle against them. So brick and mortar retailers have either got to focus on consumer engagement or not be around at all, because they're not going to win the efficiency battle. Now, Megan, I think, slightly misstates the solution here, this sort of luxury style service, even though she very much understands this issue. Online is winning at efficiency, but in doing so, online, even itself, opens itself up to a long-term weakness related to engagement. And that, of course, as she says here, is the opportunity and the strength in brick and mortar. And that is what I want to talk about, is our opportunity to renew what we do by focusing our engagement in a different way with our brands. Of course, even if we could make marketing less overwhelming, people are still going to resist it. You probably don't remember the second Sugar Ray Leonard and Roberto Duran fight like I do. You have to be an old person like me. The no mas fight, but it's kind of the no more, I've had enough, you've pummeled me enough, I want out of this ring. And investing in marketing to boost consumer engagement is just going to be met with more and more resistance, and it's going to be abetted by a new sort of competitor that you're going to face, separating you from your customers, except perhaps at a price, which takes it back to an efficiency issue. Increasingly, there are services offering personal data lockers that seal away the personal information that we are feeding into our big data databases, and then reselling this information to marketers or closing it off to them entirely. Now, I don't want to get too hepped up about these personal data lockers, because this is a business idea that has been around since the dot-com boom of the 1990s. But it is now beginning to pick up momentum with a lot of the concerns that consumers have over trust and privacy as it relates to this emerging specter of big data. So while these kinds of businesses haven't been successful to date, in a big data world with sort of big data standing over people, these kinds of services are going to take off. It's almost as if we as marketers have this kind of self-destructive streak where we've had it so good for a long time, we just have to push it a little bit further. And when we do, we wind up pushing it just a little bit too far, which is therefore creating a new competitor to us who is not trying to sell against us with our products, but who is trying to take away access to our consumers to do our marketing. But even if we could overcome all of that, consumers are still going to push back. Whether by thought or by deed, we see this everywhere. 2/3 of consumers in our Monitor survey say very little of the marketing I see has any relevance to me. In fact, response rates to direct mail have been steadily declining over the past decade and have dropped 25% and now stand at under 5%. Indeed, even responses to surveys have dropped over this sort of 15-year period from 1 in 3 to 1 in 10. And as we see in our Monitor data, people are increasingly narrowing their circles even in social media. We've talked about this in a variety of other contexts, but people are unfriending people, they are untagging themselves from photos, they are drawing in their boundaries and closing in their circles. And the bottom line is that consumers want less. Even as they immerse themselves in more, they want less. It's not that they don't want brand engagement, they just want less of the kind of marketing involvement that has characterized the marketplace to date. Indeed, marketing issues are embroiling brands in efficiency. Marketing has become all about efficiency, and it now almost holds us hostage. It's always been important, but with the current and growing future volume of marketing, it has established a momentum that makes it harder to work with consumers, and it makes marketing less palatable to consumers. Indeed, this focus on efficiency also entails an assumption, an implicit assumption, that it's just the same old consumer out there, just with new ways of connecting, what I talked about earlier, when in fact, consumers have changed too. Consumers are saying, it's not the same old me. I don't want better marketing tools. I want to engage with your brand in a very different way. And marketing in consumers' eyes is becoming increasingly distant from the ways in which they want to engage with brands. You see this very clearly in research. This is a study that was conducted by Forbes recently in which they contrasted the opinions of consumers and marketers about what constitutes brand engagement. So the yellow bars you see here are marketers, and these are the metrics that marketers use to track brand engagement and the percentage of marketers who do so. The pink bars are consumers who say, oh yes, when I do this, it's a form of brand engagement. Indeed, what consumers are saying is the things that you're tracking as measures of brand engagement don't have anything to do with the way I think about being engaged with a brand. They're just some of your metrics to track your marketing efficiency, but they have nothing to do with the way in which I'm thinking about my engagement with your brand. Indeed, in our efforts to rebuild our lost marketing engagement, we've become entirely focused on issues of efficiency and have kind of lost sight of what we need to do to make sure that for the long term we are building this brand engagement. And there was a little blog post at Forbes.com that was related to this, and I apologize for this sort of long insert box here, but let me just tell you a little bit about the insight here and just kind of take you through this excerpt from this blog post. This blogger said, you know, the IBM Institute for Business Value has found that 2/3 of business leaders believe consumers follow their brands on social media because they want to be part of a community, engage with the brand through social media marketing. And only about 1/4 or 1/3 of consumers agree. The top reason they follow a brand? To get a discount. Marketers push out too much information, which causes people to overthink, making them more likely to change their minds, less confidence in their choice, and less likely to remain loyal. Loyalty takes a hit when consumers become overwhelmed. So what should we do? Well, the conference executive board surveyed consumers and marketers and said the answer is simplify the decision-making process so that consumers actually think less about the decision. Well, there's actually some truth in that. Simplify the decision process. But the truth in this is that it means that we will create less engagement with our brands in order to solve this problem of efficiency. The way in which you solve the problem of inundating consumers is to simplify things and to make it so that consumers have to think less about the decision, which means that marketing is kind of stuck with this paradox. When we're losing efficiency through saturation and clutter, we lose engagement. But then when we improve our efficiency through better, simpler processes and pass-through, we also lose engagement. You know, the bottom line is there's nothing about marketing in a big data world that works to build consumer engagement. And so to build engagement with our brands, we have to look elsewhere. And indeed, all of this occurs against a backdrop of consumers who are saying to us, you know what, I'm not even sure marketing really makes a lot of sense to me anymore. It's a fragile state of mind for many consumers nowadays for whom marketing will often seem alien and out of reach. Indeed, the recent index of consumer sentiment by Reuters and the University of Michigan shows that after a huge bump up in consumer sentiment in November, we had a huge bump down in December. Consumers remain very fragile in their connection to the marketplace. And they are saying to us they want to change the way we do business. No more. Change it to do something different. In fact, in our monitor data, 2/3 agree. If I had the chance to do it, I would do things very differently. I'd do it differently in my lifestyle. I'd do it differently in every aspect of my lifestyle. And for us, that means we need to think about engaging with consumers in their lifestyles in a very different way. And that then takes us to this question of how we need to realign our thinking about marketing in order to connect with consumers more effectively. And this takes us back to this graphic that I showed earlier that tells us how brand engagement is shifting from the left to the right, shifting from marketing engagement to consumption engagement. It's not that we're losing consumers because our marketing tools aren't good enough. Indeed, we're not losing consumers. Consumers want to stay engaged with our brands. It's only our marketing that's losing them, and that's an efficiency issue. Our brands still have them after the sale, and our marketing tools aren't going to change this. It's not a question of tools. It's a question of how we use what we have at hand. And consumers say less marketing, more product, more consumption. It's not about making marketing more interesting. It's about understanding the new role for marketing in a big data world. And with marketing engagement declining, the imperatives of brand engagement shift as well. The first of these imperatives is for marketing to be active in the background, not the foreground. And I kind of mean this in two senses. First, I mean it as in pushing more into sort of the emerging areas we see in things like behavioral economics of managing context, to be less imposing, less disruptive, and more managing a framework within which consumers can consume the things that we push to them through our marketing. The second sense is to let the consumption experience do your selling and to embed marketing within it. This is not about making marketing more interesting, but about embedding marketing as a component of the consumption experience. But of course, as we do this, we have to take care, because when marketing intrudes too much into consumption, we always get pushback. This is a challenge that's been faced by social media sites most recently. You know, they were created as consumption sites, not marketing tools, and now we're trying to turn them into marketing or media vehicles. And in the process have done so, by and large, kind of clumsily or with a heavy hand, and so we get this pushback from consumers. But if we can do it well, and I'll show you a couple of examples in a minute, then we have an opportunity to be the right kind of background component to this consumption experience. Secondly, we need to focus our big data databases and our big data models more on consuming than marketing. We need to learn as much about how people use our products as how people buy them, because that's the help that people are more open to these days. And thirdly, we have to enhance the consumption experience, not interrupt it with our marketing. And as we enhance it, we need to do so in three kinds of ways: a focus on play, a focus on kinship, and a focus on cultivation. And as we rethink that, things related to usage, product, immersion, experience, we will be less focused on efficiency issues that drive marketing and selling, and more focused on innovation issues that are going to create our growth opportunities going forward. And that, of course, is where we want our focus. And that then takes me to the last of these three elements, and that is a discussion of this idea of renewal. So what I want to do for each of these three areas, play, kinship, and cultivation, is tell you a little bit about what the idea is, what the concept means, and then show you some examples of the ways in which we see this being expressed in the marketplace today. Examples that show brands creating more compelling experiences that engage consumers in their brands, and brands embedding marketing as a subordinate component of these consumption experiences that even make marketing itself work a little bit better. And so let's start with this idea of play. And by play, I just mean consumers are looking for a broad shift in the overall tenor of everyday life. They don't want to be less serious or escapist. They just want life to feel more gratifying. Indeed, this is a big need that consumers express as we see it in our monitor data. Just over the last couple of years, the percentage of consumers who say they enjoy life and celebrate it has dropped, as well as the percentage of consumers who say they know how to have fun these days. As I mentioned, marketing itself even becomes more beguiling, if you will, when its purpose is to help make a product experience more diverting. And by play, I mean a lot of things. There are many senses of play, as you'll see in any thesaurus, and we should use them all. In fact, perhaps the most important sense of play these days it is the legacy of Steve Jobs. What he has left behind is literally a world of play. Apps are all that life is these days. Everything that we do for fun, everything that is serious, our finances, our shopping, our work, everything that we do is now coming to us in the form of an app. But apps embody this feeling of play. They have that aspect to them. They embody this aesthetic enjoyment of actually interacting with that as a process. And so all of life's edges have been softened by this enduring legacy of Steve Jobs, who has turned everything we do into a form of play. The lines have been blurred by the diffusion of this gloss of play as an overlay to everything that we do. So for your brands, just take this literally and put some such touch screens in your product experience. For example, as a part of the relaunch of its 8th floor co-op at its flagship store in New York, as the little description here says, Barney's launched an interactive cafe that features a 30-foot-long banquet table that operates as a digital river with 28 interactive touchscreens flowing across the table, enabling diners to order food, browse Barney's goods for sale, and do it all on the same interactive surface. Indeed, there's a restaurant in London right now where you sit at an interactive table and you can order, change the table design, select music, watch the chefs, all from this touch screen. Whatever you were doing in the past has now been turned into a form of play. The Lego store in Chicago has an interactive screen that transforms shoppers into Lego characters and then lets them play a virtual game in store. You may think, gee, I sell the lowest involvement product in the history of mankind. None of my consumers are ever going to want to do this. And if you say that, you are writing off your opportunities. Because what consumers are saying is, even from the least interesting to the most interesting, I want every product interaction I have these days to be some form of play. So let your imagination run wild and engage consumers with your brands, not by overwhelming them with more marketing, but by offering them a more compelling experience in their usage. For example, at showoff.com, homeowners can upload photos of their home and then use free design tools to let their imaginations run wild. This is a very serious thing, spending a lot of money on a home improvement project that has been transformed into a form of play. My favorite example of this is a new little online store called Ditto. You use your webcam to record a video of your face. That then creates a virtual 3D you that can then try on glasses frames. And your virtual face can look from side to side, can even blink, and you can find multiple frames you like and then get feedback from your friends by posting shots of yourself with different glasses on your Facebook page. It is all about thinking outside the box and then putting some of this in remaking the entire experience that consumers have with your brand, and doing so in a way that, like Ditto, marketing itself becomes a form of consumption. And as you embody play, mix it up. There's a place called Spinlates, which is a Hollywood exercise studio that has remixed spinning classes by combining them with Pilates. Neither of these is a new technique, but it's a new combination to re-engage spinners in their workouts. It creates a new feeling of what it is to live ordinary, everyday life. It makes it into an adventure. The LA Farmers Market tells people who visit there, your errand has just become an adventure. So why not give people that context in the interaction with your brand? Give it some enigma. Give it some mystery. Tell people that's what it is. And then offer them a way in which they can have that experience. At the farmers market, they've got all kinds of vendors to make it a very intriguing place where you can people watch, sample special foods, and browse through all kinds of interesting knickknacks. It even makes routine errands like going to the butcher or, say, the grocery store, feel like impulsive play. And of course, if it's an adventure, then play is also a little bit of romance. And in the promotion for the new film Hope Springs, which is about spicing up a 30-year-old marriage, the sweepstakes being run in conjunction with the movie is called Rediscover Romance, with ads featuring suggestions to help couples reignite the spark. It is turning the marketing into a form of consumption itself. And of course, this engagement with one another reminds us that play is all about joining a team. And so Nike has said, when you consume our product, do so as part of a club, a Nike Plus Run Club, so that your routine exercise becomes a social event. Because after all, you could run without us, but why would you do that? As if to say, as the little description here notes, why bother unless you're doing it with a club? And of course, just to wrap this up a little bit with two last thoughts, play is smiling. Smile and the world smiles with you. My favorite TV ad right now is this campaign being run by Volkswagen called Smiles, which shows a life stage chronology of babies and then children and then adults all laughing and smiling, one after another, with not a single picture of a car. And the tagline at the end says, it's not the miles, it's how you live them. It's about enjoying the experience of life and our product as a form of play and that kind of engagement. And in fact, what that ultimately means is that play sometimes is just plain old play. There's an organization just started in Washington, D.C. called Spacious that wants to launch a playful revolution. Its plans include cruising D.C. in old ice cream trucks called Spacious Mobiles that people can follow on Twitter, offering on-the-spot hairdressing, cookies and milk, and recess teams to organize flash mobs to go line dancing down city streets. Or maybe it's just these two guys, Super Clogger, a little two-man theater operation that they stage in the open back hatch of an SUV on traffic-clogged LA freeways. They use an FM radio transmitter to broadcast the dialogue. One guy drives or sits in traffic, and the other guy performs for drivers stuck in traffic. Now, admittedly, these guys aren't associated with any brand, but why couldn't your brand do something like this? After all, just yesterday, a 50-foot rubber duck floated down the Thames River, even winding its way through some of the waterways in the city, the financial heart of London, to celebrate the launch of JackpotJoy.com's Facebook Foundation, an initiative granting funds and rewards for wacky ideas to encourage people in Britain to laugh more and to have more fun. It's all about play. And it's also all about kinship, which answers the question of what matters more when relationships matter most. Now, last year's live was about kinship, so I don't want to recover some of that same ground here today. As you remember, last year I talked about the history of the marketplace moving from a material marketplace centered on product as the locus of value to a marketplace of intangibles centered on service as the locus of value to today's marketplace, which is all about social and centered on relationships, which makes kinship the best metaphor for understanding how people want to engage our brands, be part of our family, have an intimate relationship with us, and be part of something where they feel like we're putting their interest ahead of our own. What this means, and what I didn't talk about last year, but what some of you may have seen me talk about this year, is that our model of brand engagement needs to change, exactly what I've been talking about here today. It used to be brand-centric, where brands would engage consumers largely through marketing, to a world today where it has to be relationship-central. People are saying, I don't want to have a relationship with a brand, I want to have a relationship with other people. And I want brands that will facilitate and foster my relationships with other people. And I showed you an example last year of Westmill Capital, a development company in Washington, D.C., that is not going out and doing traditional research on how to figure out what properties to put in this stretch of D.C. where they have open storefronts, but instead has created a website called Popularize.com where people in the community can interact with other people in the community to talk about what kind of community they'd like to have. A brand facilitating and fostering people-to-people interactions. And it's not just development groups. Lowe's now offers an idea exchange, where people can bring their home improvement ideas and put them up online and talk about them to other people, not to a Lowe's salesperson, but have a person-to-person interaction, and Lowe's is the brand facilitating and fostering that in a kinship economy. And as we do so, we need to tap into this final element of cultivation as well, which is simply to say, how can we buff up everyday life with extra shine and luster? You know, if we think about life in the trenches, think about our own lives, it is filled with all kinds of uncultivated realities. Clutter, overload, all those things we do to people. Anxiety, all the things the economy tells us. It's hurried, we have no time, we face uncertainty, lots of the people we deal with are lackadaisical, or they're curt, or they're inconsiderate. That's life. And yet it's also life that is balanced by flashes of cultivation. Moments of real beauty, moments of joy, random acts of kindness, simple pleasures, what really matters, just a moment to breathe. So as a brand, why not tip the balance even more? Why not make more of everyday life an experience in which people can truly invest themselves? Because again, this is something that we see in our data that people are looking for more and more. Something where they can feel true to themselves. And I'll give you 3 ideas here about about cultivation. The first of which is that it is polish. It is polishing up the way in which we experience all of these uncultivated things in our lives. So one of the things that we've talked about in our future predictions for 2013 this year, and which you can find more about on day 3 of our planning horizons at our website, is this idea of Nordicool, or this notion that Scandinavia has emerged as the new hotspot of cool. You know, the book The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the TV shows The Killing and Borgen, and the Wallander novels that have made a big popular appearance on British TV, hand-knit Scandinavian sweaters. Noma in Copenhagen has been voted the world's best restaurant for 3 years running, and this revival of Nordic design, which is a natural fit for times of austerity, because it is a minimalism that offers practical solutions for people facing retrenchment with an aspirational overlay that shows less is actually more. So polish up the ugly part of people's lives and give them something aspirational to do with it. Or cultivation also means being artisanal. So there's this new line of hand-cut pasta from Williams-Sonoma made from an heirloom wheat with a specific provenance, and even something everyday like this box of spaghetti shown here in this picture can be delivered with more cultivation. It's about taking the ordinary, everyday, oftentimes uncultivated aspects of life and making them into something that feels more cultivated, more polished, more artisanal, more embedded with savoir-faire, even homespun savoir-faire. So there's a new Calgary-based startup that's debuting in San Francisco called Style U. People sign up to have their wardrobes digitized on mannequins. These items are then combined into outfits by Bay Area stylists, and the results are accessible in an app, surprise, searchable by mood or occasion. People can also see complementary items from retailers. The marketing is part of the consumption. This is taking your everyday wardrobe and making it more cultivated, giving people a different experience of life. And ultimately, that's what this is all about. It is moving from this kind of marketing engagement focused on efficiency to this kind of consumption engagement that is all about innovation. And in understanding that, we find a way in which our brands can continue to engage consumers, notwithstanding the advances of the big data world, that are going to increasingly focus our marketing only on issues of efficiency, leaving engagement behind. And so the way to bring consumers back into arm's reach in a big data world is to focus less on marketing and more on consumption, and to do so in a way that drives growth opportunities for our businesses by the innovation associated with that refocusing of our brands. I appreciate everybody joining us here this afternoon. If you have further questions or would like a copy of this deck, please contact your Monitor service rep. And we look forward to seeing you on January for the Download of Men live teleconference then. Thank you very much.